1747 was another Simon. Simon Fraser, the Lord Lovett, an 80-year-old Scottish lord who supported the Second Jacobite Rebellion led by Bonnie Prince Charlie in 1745. Is anybody here called Simon? So I would leave now, Simon. Now just for a moment we're going to pause. We're going to imagine the scene up there on a day of execution. Thousands of people would have gathered around a raised wooden platform, the scaffold, to witness the proceedings. There would have been much merriment. Alcohol may have been consumed. It would have been an action-packed, fun day out for the whole family. And the crowd would have been extremely loud. They would have wanted to witness this spectacle. Having delivered his final speech and said his prayers, the condemned man would place himself down, his neck resting on a block of oak. He would then give a word or a signal, and the executioner would bring down his axe, hopefully beheading his victim with one stroke. The executioner would then pick up the severed, still bleeding head and hold it aloft for all to see. Special effects, ladies and gentlemen. He would loudly proclaim, "Behold, the head of a traitor! So die all traitors! God save the king! Huzzah! Huzzah!" Do you remember when I said the crowd would be loud? Do you remember that part? Okay, so you remember it. That was a large hit for you, ladies and gentlemen, okay? After the failure of Good Afternoon, I thought you were going to bring it back. But no, you didn't. Right, we're going to try it again, folks, okay? Now, you can say huzzah. You can say, God save the king. If any Americans amongst you and you want to say yeehaw, I will not be offended. Okay? Right, the executioner will pick up the seven, still bleeding head, hold it aloft for sea, and proclaim, behold, that a traitor, so die all traitors, God save the king! Slightly better. The head would then be impaled onto a pike and carried through the streets of London to London Bridge, which in those days was the only bridge across the River Thames. The head would be left displayed above the gateway entrance as a sign of the fate that would await all would-be traitors. And yes, I'm pointing in that direction to London Bridge, because that is where you will find London Bridge. That bridge over there, with the towers, right next door to the Tower of London, strangely enough, is called Tower Bridge. Now, who could get the two bridges confused? Go to Arizona and you will find out. You must be taken down, placed into a small handcart and brought back inside the tower, where it would be quickly buried in an unmarked grave in the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula. We're going to make that same journey. We're going to go through that archway over there. As we go through that archway, I'd like you to look up. Not yet, over there. And you see the spike of a portcullis, or medieval drop gate, that weighs over 1.5 tons. It dates from 1326, and the rope holding it also dates from 1326. So we're going to be walking quickly. You may also notice 3 circular holes drilled through the stonework above your head. They are known as murder holes. They're probably just used by the defenders of that tower to empty their waste buckets into a cart, all members of the public as they pass beneath. People still live in the top of that tower. I do not know if their waste buckets are empty or full. I'm going to be walking quickly. Now make a gap and I'll lead you in. It means get out of my way. Kick off. I like to walk briskly. Good. Ward of the Tower of London, that is to say, we're between the inner and the outer balliums, or defensive walls. Now the inner wall stands 50 feet high in certain parts. The outer one behind you is 28 feet thick in certain parts. Down there, is Mint Street, where the coins of the realm were designed and produced until 1810. Now the buildings which house the mint are known as the casemates, or houses within the wall. They not only serve as a museum, which you can go into over there, but they also serve as accommodation for myself and some of my yeoman warder colleagues and our families. Yes, as yeoman warders of the Tower of London, we do get the privilege of living here. And yes, you guessed it. It is awesome! Now over there is a tall, narrow archway known as the Sallyport, or Royal Entrance, beyond which there was a small drawbridge leading out to the Queen's Stairs, directly accessing the River Thames. Now rather than travel through the dark, dirty, dangerous streets of London, royalty and nobility would travel in their impressive barges along the river. They would tie up alongside those stairs and gain access through that archway, which is original and it dates back more than 700 years. It was at that very archway that King Henry VIII so lovingly greeted his second wife, Anne Boleyn, on the eve of her coronation in 1533. But poor Anne was fated to return to the Tower just 3 years later, for a very different reason, through a very different gate. Now this is the Bell Tower. So who can tell me why it's called the Bell Tower? Because it's got a bell in it! Now inside, the white belfry on the top contains the oldest surviving curfew bell in the City of London. When sounded an alarm, that would have been the signal to close all the gates, lower the portcullis and man the battlements for defence. Now the Bell Tower is the strongest of the 13 on the inner wall, standing on a base of solid masonry, some 30 feet deep. But there are only 2 prison chambers inside. Due to its form of construction, it is obvious that prisoners were held within this tower. A man for all seasons, Sir Thomas More, Lord Chancellor of England, was held for 15 months in the lower chamber for refusing to accept King Henry VIII as supreme head of the church in England. He was to say, "I am the king's good servant, but God's first." At the same time, for the very same reason, his good friend, John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, was held in the upper chamber. Both men were to suffer terribly, but neither could be persuaded to abandon their Catholic beliefs. And so finally, they were let out through those gates and up onto Tower Hill, where they were both publicly beheaded as traitors in the summer of 1535. Now, James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, eldest of the 13 illegitimate children of King Charles II, was also imprisoned in this tower. After the death of his father in 1685, this handsome and popular young man, very much like myself, was persuaded to stake his claim to the throne by virtue of his uncle James II being a Roman Catholic. Now, to press home his claim, he landed from exile in the West Country of England, and he marched inland, gathering popular Protestant support in what became known as the Pitchfork or Monmouth Rebellion. Now, the revolt was crushed at the Battle of Sedgemoor on the 6th of July, 1685. But James Scott escaped the battlefield. He evaded capture for a week till he was found hiding in a ditch near the town of Ringwood. Condemned to death in his absence, there was no need for a trial. And so 3 days later, he was let out and up onto Tower Hill. That was to be one of the most botched and bloodiest executions ever to have taken place in English history. The executioner, Jack Ketch, used 5 strokes of his axe to dispatch his victim. And even then, the head remained stubbornly attached to the body. So Ketch pulled his butcher's knife from his belt and he proceeded to cut through the remaining tissue and sinew, blood spraying across his face, down his hand, making the knife slippery. He continued to slice through the flesh, slicing, slicing, slicing. No. Are we there yet? Slicey! He finally removed the head from the body, but strangely, both the body and the head were brought back inside the tower, where they were sewn back together before burial in the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula. Now the reason for this, he was the son of a king. They did not have a royal portrait of him. So, they stitched his head back onto his body, they dressed him in regalia, they propped him into a chair, and they commissioned an artist to paint his portrait. And the artist did say this was the best sitting he had ever taken. Now that portrait still hangs in the National Portrait Gallery, ladies and gentlemen. Go there and you will see it, okay? Now enough of this blood and gore. We must beheading. That's as good as it's going to get, folks. Around the corner up Waterlade to Traitor's Gate and the Bloody Tower. Yes, and ours has a lot less leaks than yours did. Originally known as the Watergate, how did it become known as Traitor's Gate? The name change occurred during the Tudor period due to the large numbers of alleged traitors that entered this formidable fortress through those grim gates. Among them, no less than 3 Queens of England: Queen Anne Boleyn, Queen Catherine Howard, and Lady Jane Grey, the 16-year-old uncrowned queen of only 9 days. These and many more poor, unfortunate souls would have travelled from their trials. They would have passed through those grim gates and land at these very steps, where they were met by the yeoman jailer and an escort of extremely handsome yeoman warders. They'd be taken through the Bloody Tower archway behind you to their cell or dungeon to await whatever fate had in store for them. And for some, it was a short journey to their place of execution. Behind you, the infamous Bloody Tower. See a ghostly figure. Point to him. Goes away. Well, the infamous Bloody Tower, originally known as the Garden Tower, and it overlooked and gave access to the Lieutenant's Garden. Its name was changed to the Tower of Blood, or Bloody Tower, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, to commemorate the terrible tragedies that have taken place within. Perhaps the most terrible tragedy of all is the alleged murders of the 2 boy princes in 1483. The 12-year-old uncrowned King Edward V and his 9-year-old brother, Richard Duke of York, were brought into the tower by their kind and loving uncle, Richard Duke of Gloucester, for their own safety and in order to prepare for the coronation of the eldest boy. But as soon as their kind and loving uncle had got the boys into the tower, he went to Parliament. He declared them illegitimate and he took the throne for himself, becoming King Richard III. And the sightings of both of those boys gazing from that upper window and playing in the tower grounds became less and less frequent until they disappeared altogether. It was believed that they were murdered in that upper chamber by suffocation with a pillow, their little bodies bundled down the staircase and hidden beneath a pile of stone. The next day, they were secretly buried by an unknown priest underneath the staircase on the south side of the White Tower, where they remained undisturbed for 191 years, until workmen found a chest containing the remains of 2 children. Experts of the day did indeed declare these were the bodies of the 2 boy princes. So on the orders of King Charles II, they were placed into an urn designed by Sir Christopher Wren, and they were buried in Innocents Corner, Westminster Abbey, where they remain to this day. Sweet dreams, kids! Right, make a count, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go through the archway, up the lane, up the steps. Think of it as history, physical education, all rolled into one. The Lord of the Tower of London is the oldest part of the Tower of London. Well, she stood on Tower Green, which is our village green. Now, unlike many village greens, which may have a duck pond or a mill pond, or even a cricket pitch or playground, we have something quite unique, our very own execution site! See that small glass monstrosity over there is not to be confused with the public scaffold outside on Tower Hill. Only 6 people were executed there. 3 of those were Queens of England. But before we talk about them, I'm going to describe some of the buildings that surround us. Now behind you in that direction is William's Norman Keep, known as the White Tower, the largest in the complex, on orders from William the Conqueror, work began on building it in 1078 under the direction of Gundulf of Beck, and it took 20 years to complete. And yes, I did say Gundulf of Beck. I did not say Gandalf the Grey. It was not built by a wizard and a really short workforce. Now the tower stands just over 90 feet tall. On each corner there stands a turret. If you look to the top of each turret you will see a gold crown, beneath which is a weather vane which bears the royal standard. Now they denote that the tower is still indeed a working royal palace, although no longer a royal residence. All of our kings and queens lived in there for well over 500 years, the last being King James I of England in 1603. Now the royal family lived mainly on the top floor. The floor below is a banqueting hall, council chamber, accommodation for knights and their ladies, and is where the Chapel Royal of St John the Evangelist is located. The lower floor was occupied by servants and retainers. There is one more floor, which is partly below ground level, where stores and provisions were kept. But parts of that floor had a far more sinister use, as a dungeon and a torture chamber, where the rack and other implements of torture were used on poor, unfortunate souls. It was a dark, damp, evil-smelling place, lit only by the candles of the torturers, and no cries of pain or anguish could be heard outside of those thick walls. But have no fear, because today it is brightly lit and very little trace of its former use remains. But if you dare to venture down there, you will still hear blood-curdling screams, because it's a gift store. Yeah, you wait till you see the prices in there. Now down there is a lane. It leads to the entrance to the bloody tower, the scene of the alleged murders of the 2 boy princes. Moving to the right, see a large black and white L-shaped building. That is the Queen's House. It's the best preserved Tudor building in the City of London. It dates from 1540. All the others were destroyed in the Great Fire of 1666. That is the home to the Constable of the Tower of London, who was appointed by Her Majesty the Queen to look after the tower in her stead. As a residence of such a high-ranking man, it has sometimes been used to house some notable prisoners. Queen Catherine Howard spent her last days in there before her execution in 1542. And one of the last state prisoners to be held in that house was Rudolf Hess, deputy leader of Nazi Germany, who was held for just 3 days in May 1941 before being moved to the countryside for his own safety. Later tried at Nuremberg, he died in Spandau Prison, Berlin in 1987. In front of you is the Beauchamp Tower. And if you look closely behind the large window there, you see a ghostly figure taking a selfie with a mobile phone. Not a very friendly ghost. Anyway, that was the state prison room. If you go in there today, you will find 91 inscriptions carved into the stonework by the prisoners, some of which date back more than 500 years. On this side is the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula. We're going to go in there shortly to finish our tour. Behind you in that direction is the Waterloo Barracks. Erected in 1845, it served as accommodation for over 1,000 soldiers of the Tower garrison. It is now the home to the crown jewels and the royal regalia, and it can be entered through an entranceway on the ground level directly beneath the large gold and black clock. If you look at the Waterloo Barracks, in the centre you see a large gold and black clock. Look directly down from it, there is an entranceway. Written on that entranceway is the crown jewels. If you look closely, you may see members of the public going through that entranceway. When they get inside that building, they will see the crown jewels and the royal regalia. Now behind you in that direction, there's a signpost. One of the arms on the signpost has a small picture of a crown on it. It also says crown jewels, and it's pointing to the centre of the Waterloo Barracks, where you see a large golden black clock, beneath which, on the ground level, there's an entranceway. Britons, everybody know what's happening here? Yes. Yes. But the crown jewels and the royal regalia, and yes, they are real, are inside that building. So, if you'd like to go and see them, go into that building. As we turn our attention to the execution site behind me, remember, only 6 people executed there, 3 of those Queens of England. We're going to talk about those Queens of England inside the chapel. Before we enter the chapel, I must inform you that it's still very much a place of Christian worship. As such, I ask that you treat it as you would your own places of worship. To that end, could all gentlemen please remove your hats and headdress before entering, if your religion permits. Ladies, you can keep yours on if you so wish. There's to be no eating, drinking or smoking whilst we're inside, and that does include those very strange vapour devices. There's also to be no photography or recording of any kind. To do that in there would amount to treason. You know what we do to traitors. Now please ensure that your mobile or cell phone is now switched off, because if it goes off inside the chapel, you will die of embarrassment. If anybody here is fortunate enough to be under the age of 29, when you turn your mobile cell phones off, your heart will continue to beat, okay? Now, as we enter the chapel, there is a small step in the doorway. It's got a threshold step. It's in the doorway. It's this high. It's been there for hundreds of years. It's going to be there as we enter. It's going to be there while we're inside. It's still going to be there when we leave. I've warned you about this small step in the doorway. 3 of you are going to trip over this step, and the ground beneath you is extremely hard. As you're going into the chapel, you're going down the main aisle, filling up from the front row of seats, left and right, ensuring that all the seats are taken, working your way to the back row of seats. Now, if you'd like to make your way over to my colleague Sean there, he's going to drop that chain and let you in.